Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, is this mic on? Yep. Okay, well, welcome very much to a new experiment for Durrell in this election year. Welcome to the Green Hustings. Welcome to everyone that's in the room right now, to all our candidates who've taken the time to come this evening. This is our first constituency. Of course, we have many more candidates waiting to come through. And welcome to our online viewers. This is live streaming on vote.ge on the social media channels. Now, for the purposes of the people in this room right now and for the people next door, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping. In the event of a fire, the Durrell staff will issue instruction, but essentially we have 2 emergency exits that are push bars in this room. There's also the front entrance as well and another back entrance, but we will look after that in the case of a fire, and everyone can muster outside the front of this building. In the event of an animal escaping, no comments on the candidates. In the event of an animal escaping, again, look to us as a staff. We will issue instruction, and in that case, what we'll be telling you is we're locking you in this building. So it's very straightforward. Just look to us and we will deal with everything about that. Now, that's the housekeeping. The purpose of this evening is to have a conversation about the environment and what that means in terms of this election process. The environment underpins absolutely everything to do with human life on Earth. So it's going to be a very broad range of questions. We're going to give the candidates opportunity to answer a question each because of the number of candidates. But the questions we will be asking this evening, they've been distributed to the candidates ahead of time for transparency. But what we will also do is tomorrow onwards, we will make all the questions public on our social media channels. Because what we want this to be is the start of the conversation, to give these questions to the population to then continue the discussion with the candidates in their own constituency, so people can start to get into these conversations more. So that's what we really want to do, is begin a conversation this evening, give the candidates a chance to think about these issues and where it really plays a part in their own constituency and across the island. Now, we have very tight timing, so I am going to be a ruthless moderator, and I will cut the candidates off at 2 minutes 30. 2 minutes 30 per answer. So yes, it is tight timing. But we hope to have more time at the end for further questions if we can keep to all the timings. Now, we will be, what was I going to say next? We will make sure that the information that's already been submitted by candidates, because a number of our candidates have submitted written answers as well. We will make sure that those are available to the general public. And for the candidates who are not able to join us this evening because of other commitments, they will also have the opportunity at other points to answer some of those constituency questions if they arise. You know, we want to make this as open process as possible. So that's how we're going to do it this evening. I hope the candidates are all ready. And I hope you all enjoy this as a process, because voting, I think, is probably the #1 duty of adults in society. So we're hoping this also plays a part in saying, let's all get out and vote. Whatever your view, whatever your thoughts and feelings about things, the important thing is being part of the process and voting. We hopefully, let's get the attendance at voting stations up this year so we have a really democratic process. So without further ado, I'm going to start asking the first questions. I would ask the candidates to come up to the mic. I will be timing the question. As I said, I will ruthlessly cut you off at the allotted time. And let's see where we go from there. So I'm going to start with Lucy Stevenson for St Mary, St Juan and St Peter. Lucy, what measures will you put in place during the next term to ensure that environmental biodiversity will be protected and enhanced?
I'm really going to make an apology to you, Leslie, and actually you will recognise that I'm going to be a bit of a politician and I'm not really going to answer the question. It's because I'm not an environmentalist and I'm not an expert. And actually coming here this evening really daunted me and worrying about some of the questions that might be asked because I'm not an expert. What I am an expert in is communicating with people, listening and making decisions and taking lots of information on board and then moving through a process. And I think that's a really key thing about what needs to happen as we talk about the environment in the next 4 years and beyond. We've set some really important goals, and actually as a community there's quite a long way to go to achieve that. So for an individual to answer a question like that when I'm not an expert in biodiversity, but some of you guys are, and there's lots of people in our community who are, and that's why we need to look to you to have those conversations and really listen as well. I hope nobody minds that that's the answer that I've given to you, and I do apologise for that. I will go and do some more research on biodiversity. And I did answer many of the questions, actually, and I presume they will be published as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, we will. We'll make sure that... we will make sure that we will circulate all the answers from the candidates, and yes, Lucy has kindly given written submissions for several of the questions. Now, we're going to move on now to Christina Moore, a candidate probably known to many of you. It's an interesting election because we've got so many new candidates who've not stood for election before, and familiar faces, and Christina is one of those familiar faces on the island. So the question for Christina: this is about energy supply and agency over the island's production of electricity. It is a growing issue. It's certainly exacerbated by the fishing disputes last year. So Christina, what is your stance on Jersey's current energy supply in its entirety? Would you change it? And if so, how and why?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So, at the moment, the cost of living is a key concern for the majority of people, and what we're hearing on the doorsteps is that more and more people are feeling the pinch, and therefore they're starting to really worry about food and fuel. And so, of course, this question is really important, looking through that lens, but it's also an opportunity for us to really get to grips with energy use and the sources of energy that we have available to us in the island. I think most people in the room will be familiar that most households still use oil and carbon to heat their homes, as well as obviously our big love of the motor vehicle and petrol and diesel powered cars as well. So I think that focusing on heating in the homes is one of the first places that we need to look. I'm aware that the Jersey Electricity Company have a considerable amount of money ready to invest in helping homes to switch to electric power. But of course, as Leslie mentioned there, we also have the issue of power supply, and that has always been a very secure thing, no matter what our opinions might be on nuclear fuel. And we're surrounded by a very big tidal range in the island, as well as a lot of wind energy and other ways that we can generate power. We're also the sunniest place in the British Isles, of course, and so I very much hope that part of that programme with the Jersey Electricity Company, which is of course majority publicly owned, will focus on harnessing those other energy sources and using much more solar power, but also looking at our potential to harness wind and tidal power as well, which is, now that we have so much technology available to us, something that I think can become a reality. I think that probably answers the question. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to a question for Lyndon Farnham. Food security. The UN has warned in the past 2 weeks of a global food crisis that could last for years. This is, of course, exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've additionally seen India in the past 2 weeks put a ban on all exports of wheat. India is a huge wheat producer, and we are likely to see more protectionist policies by other countries worldwide. So that, of course, has an impact on food security for ourselves as we import lots of food. So, Lyndon, what are your views on the island's level of food security? Would you change anything? If so, what would you want to change, and how would you do that?
Thank you, Leslie, and good evening. And that's one of the biggest, I think, risks and challenges that we face as a community. And this was highlighted before the war in Ukraine started, when we looked at the logistical problems caused by Brexit and, of course, COVID, when we realised how vulnerable we were as a community because we import something like 95% of what we consume. And the eating habits of citizens has changed. We conform to just-in-time systems. You see the supermarkets now have aisles and aisles of chilled and frozen food storage and not so much ambient. So gone are the days where we had big warehouses on island with stores of foodstuffs. So that means we have to look to ways of producing more food on island. I think one of the big challenges of that is that to feed a population of 100,000, the sheer volume of food we need, I think it's going to be impossible for us ever to produce what we need, what we consume on a year-round basis. But we need to embrace new ideas, innovative ideas, like Scoop, for example, and sustainable farming, so we become less reliant on what we import. Of course, so consumers are actually driving our behaviour at the moment and the behaviour of the shops and supermarkets, because despite there being a very good range of local produce available, it's hard for local growers to get it into supermarkets because it doesn't conform with their standards of packaging and so forth, that they need to get a listing in the major multiples. And of course, consumers are buying imported produce in preference over local produce. So that's a huge challenge. I don't know what the answer to that is just yet. So I don't have any answers. We know what the problems are. And I think the rural economy strategy that we've just published looks to putting a lot more investment into the rural economy to ensure we can produce as much sustainable food on island and consume as much as we possibly can. And we must provide the funding and the investment to enable local businesses to do that. But it's not going to be the be-all and end-all. There's still a huge challenge just because of the very nature of our size and our reliance on importation. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon. Now we're moving on to David Ben. The question we have for you, David, is around the carbon neutral roadmap and around carbon neutrality itself. What initiatives will you put in place to bolster the green credentials of your parish or constituency in order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030 and net zero by 2050?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. The roadmap's a very interesting document, and if you read it in full, there's been a lot of work on it by a whole cross-section of the community. For carbon neutrality, we've got a lot to do as a community as a whole, let alone the 3 parishes. But for our parishes, I'd like to see, obviously, the bus service improved so that we can use public transport a lot more, and a bus service going from east to west and west to east, not only from radiating from the town. If we all bought electric cars, the JEC couldn't cope with it, but obviously there's a move to electric cars, and that's a good thing. Electric bikes and cycling, and obviously there's now a move towards more cycling. To use less fuel and to move away from oil and gas, one of the main things we can do is to insulate our houses a lot more. I've spent some years in France building, and there are techniques that we are not using here. We're still quite a long way behind. France and Germany are way ahead of of England and ourselves in their building techniques. So for future housing, we ought to be using techniques that are far more adaptable to the environment. We ought not to be using cement if we can. Cement isn't a good product for the environment. Lime and other products are very good. As a member of a working party in France, I visited a lot of new developments that were free to each plot owner, and they were able to build fabulous houses. If you go back now, some 20 years later, the little villages are super. And none of those houses have cement at all. They are all built without. They're built with soil, they're built with straw, they're built with any kind of good material, and they are really super. It sounds a bit funny building with soil, but the subsoil, not organic soil, is a very, very good product. In fact, I owned one house in France that had that, and it was fantastic to heat. And then we can also go to growing more vegetables ourselves instead of going to the shops. We can shop locally instead of shopping elsewhere. We can plant trees. I would favour planting a lot more trees on hedges than in fields, because we are going to need the fields to feed ourselves in the future. How many?
10.
10. Oh,
5.
So there's a lot we can do, an awful lot we can do as a community to reduce that and increase the carbon roadmap, and bring it down perhaps, because I think 2050 is a little bit too late.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I told you I'd be ruthless. Now, our last candidate for this constituency is again a very familiar face on Ireland, Ian Gorst. Ian, an outcome of COP26, the climate COP last year, was a global pledge to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. What role would you play in helping Jersey contribute to this pledge, despite the limited support within the carbon neutral roadmap for the pledge?
Thank you, Leslie, and good evening, everyone. I just want to pick up where Lucy left off. I think that some of the candidates tonight are environmental experts. I am not one of those. But what it is important in tackling the matter that you've asked me about, and all of these environmental matters, is that we come together as a community and we play to our strengths. So I was, with the Environment Department, responsible for ensuring that Paris was extended to Jersey. That means we are now, as a matter of an international treaty, we have got obligations that we can't get out of, and it's going to require all of us to work together to meet those obligations. I was also involved in working with financial services to make sure that they are making the most of ESG and becoming a finance centre which is known for its environmental credentials. Arising out of COP26, I think the reason that as a government we didn't make too much about the deforestation was because we're not a very forested island. That's not an excuse, because we can actually forest greater areas of our island rather than thinking about deforestation. So we're in a positive position of being able to go the other way around. I know that National Trust is doing some really great work, and you've been involved in that as well, with reforesting and rewooding Jersey, and that is something that we absolutely should support. We should support farmers with the work that they are doing around their hedgerows and leaving extra bits of their land so that they can think about tree planting as well. We know in the UK, of course, farmers are getting subsidies to grow trees. We need to be careful about that we don't have other unintended consequences, because this is why we have to work together and play to our strengths. Because if you've got trees everywhere, then we can't deal with the on-island supply of food, which is another challenging issue that we face. So I am absolutely committed to making sure that we comply with our obligations arising out of Paris, that we continue our engagement with what started in COP26 and will now move on to COP27. And in my department, we're already thinking about the areas that we want to engage there above and beyond the financial services area that we need to commit to as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I would only add, I'm a neutral moderator this evening, but to raise a point, I think one other thing we need to think about as an island, and it relates to our food sources, is imported deforestation, as it's called. what deforestation has been caused globally by the food that we choose to eat. It's another area to consider. Now, before the candidates, not too that. Before the candidates go, and we're going to bring the next constituency in, one further point that I would like to make, and for us all to remember in this election cycle, is the candidates are putting themselves forward. We are putting them on the spot with difficult questions, and sometimes they get a very, very hard time. So we're being tough with our questions this evening, but I think it would be good to remind everyone at home, watching as well, that the candidates are standing up and taking responsibility and putting themselves forward for the scrutiny. And I think we should thank them for doing that as well, because the rest of us are not. So thank you very much to this constituency, and we'll bring the next one in. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have our next constituency, and this is St. Brelad. Thank you very much. So you'll hear some of the questions repeated, because of course we want to see if a different candidate has a different take on a question. I mean, ultimately it'd be amazing if all the candidates over the next few weeks could give a view on these questions, but we'll ask them a couple of times this evening. Now, the first question is for Jonathan Renouf, and this is a question that we just asked about food security, because it is such an important issue. What are your views on the island's level of food security? Would you change anything? If so, what would you change and how?
Great. Hello, everyone. So food security, it's a very interesting time to be talking about it, isn't it? Because it's in the national news, but it's also in the local news. You know, we've got obviously the problems that we've seen with Ukraine and so on, which are framing the macro picture. But we've also got our own problems here with Woodside Farms having threatened with closure, and we know that our potato industry is under pressure, and we know that the dairy industry also struggles on a year-to-year basis. So we know that I think we all know that we want greater food security. Who wouldn't? But we clearly have problems achieving it, even in a situation where we know how important it is. So I think we've got to look at what is going wrong. Why is our farming industry struggling so much? I think that one of the answers they would give is that we don't give them as much money as some of our competitors. But I think we can take a slightly longer term view than that and think, what are the things that might help us beyond just giving more money? So I think 2 or 3 things would help. One is, I think we need to think, what is the future of farming? Because it isn't going to be exactly like the farming that we have now. It's going to involve more regenerative techniques. It's going to involve less inputs. And there is a journey we have to go on to get to that position. We can't expect farmers to transition overnight in that direction, but we should incentivize that journey. Another thing I think that we can do, the second thing I think we can do, is we can diversify our food production in the island by thinking about what other things, other than our staple sort of famous things, can we do. And I've met a few people who've had really interesting ideas, that the things they want to do to grow things or to keep livestock, often on a small scale, but quite interesting, innovative things. And I think one of the problems is that we don't give people easy access to the land. It is hard for people who want to do something clever and different to get access to good farmland. So that's something I think we really need to work with the landowners and with the farmers to try and improve. So you've only got 2 of my many, many ideas to improve food security. So you'll have to read some of my stuff to get the rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to reiterate Jonathan's point, you know, the candidates have only got a little bit of time this evening This is a taster. As the voting public, it's our task to ask the further questions and to keep this conversation going. So thank you for that. Our next candidate is Helen Miles. And this question is around the transport sector. So transport is Jersey's largest source of carbon emissions. Road transport accounts for 32% of all emissions. Therefore, it's a priority sector in thinking about how we tackle the climate emergency, how we respond to it. What do you believe are the key areas within the transport sector that need addressing in order to achieve a reduction in emissions, but also to benefit islanders?
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie, for the question. As one of the previous speakers said, there's no question that actually Jersey loves the motor car. And I think some people have said that we've actually got more motor cars than we have people. So alternatives to driving a car in Jersey need to be easy, they need to be accessible, and they need to be affordable. I think there are things that we could promote, such as carpooling. We could continue to improve our cycling infrastructure and our walking infrastructure, especially at peak times. And I would also support creating an island-wide cycle network. I think there's a difficulty at the moment with electric cars and electric bikes. Evidently, we don't have a second-hand market. Now, if I take the example of my mother, for example, who's going to be 83 tomorrow, her petrol vehicle is actually coming to the end of its life. She won't be buying an electric car. She won't be buying an electric bike. So what do we do to make sure that she can still get around? We actually live too far away from a bus stop, so it's too difficult for her to walk to the bus. So one of the things that we have been doing in St Brelard is having transport connections. So we have a minibus that picks up people, and I think it takes them into St Peter. So we need to make our environmentally friendly transport systems actually available and useful and easy, not just for the elderly. I think one of the things that we've done already, which is a great initiative, is to make the buses free for the under 18s. I would sincerely like to see subsidised bus passes potentially for a greater range of people. I'm very pleased to see the young people because it will get them into the habit of using the bus. Most of us were probably given driving lessons for our 17th birthday. Let's move away from that, because as soon as you get your driving lessons, you want a car, and we start seeing 2 and 3, even 4 car households. I think there's another area around the transport sector which is vital, and that is road safety. As I've been walking around the parish, I've taken my own life in my own hands in these last couple of days, and particularly for parishioners living on Route de Noirmont, they are all telling me that there have been serious near misses. So we need to make transport available, accessible and cheap, and those are some of my ideas for achieving that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to Nigel Jones. This gets back to some of the comments mentioned earlier about food security. How do you plan on supporting and developing the agricultural industry within your parish, and more widely supporting agriculture across the island?
Thank you. There are a lot of fields when you look on Google Maps, satellite view, to the east of St Bellards and all the way across the south of it. There's quite a big conurbation in the middle. So yes, we have a lot of farmers still active. When I was a kid, there was many more farms. We had cows on the other side of the Kennebec Road when I was growing up on my side of it. We need to encourage these farmers to be able to stay in business and to be able to diversify and to be able to move into the more modern practices. We've already mentioned regenerative farming. This is where we are building up the soil and building up the biodiversity at the same time as producing food in a field. That's a very important skill that farmers are going to have to be taking on. At the moment, farming is still recovering from what was called the Green Revolution some decades ago, where we actually encourage farmers to cover their land in what are effectively toxic chemicals in order to make the plants grow quickly. Of course, everything except the crop plants suffered terribly, and now we have a biodiversity crisis on top of everything else. Farm fields are a large part of our land surface, and we have to make sure that they are living environments. Otherwise, we're cultivating a dying island and a dying planet. So I would diversify local farming generally across the board. We need to be producing more different types of crops. We produce 2 or 3 species in massive quantities and then ship them off the island. We need to be producing crops that are for local consumption and that are diverse and varied so that we can have a diverse and varied diet. This means we need to be growing grain locally. I've been involved in a local organic farm milling their own wheat in Kettville Mill in St. Peter's Valley. It can be done. We need to be growing pulses and beans. These are very rich sources of protein. This will be part of the process of reducing our meat consumption, which will do us all good and will do the planet good. Pulses and beans are, of course, a staple of Jersey. The Jersey bean crock is what Jersey people were eating long before processed food came along.
10 seconds, Nigel.
So with a much more diverse range of things being grown, regeneratively and organically on our farms, we can be producing much more food for local consumption and making a better job of the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next candidate is Carl Bush. This might be a bit of a toughie. There is a sex bias in active travel on this island. We know that that is very profound in cycling. Girls and women cycle far less than boys and men. And in terms of encouraging active transport modes on island, we do see that difference. So, what would you do to address the gender gap for active travel and encourage cycling for all young people on the island?
Thank you. Well, I am not an environmentalist academic. However, I do believe that I'm an environmentalist as in my person. I have, from a very early age, been instilled with this ethos of cycling absolutely everywhere. The dependency on the car from an early age, that was you only used the car essentially. And I think what happens when you have that interest in cycling from a very early age, you have this awareness about you, about the road. You read the road, and I think from experience you can probably see accident spots happening in front of your eyes, and you automatically just adjust to that. Now, sexism in cycling, is that what you said?
It's not sexism, it's just a gender gap.
I honestly, from what I've seen on this island, the amount of women, young women, children, female children, I find that absolutely astounding.
I'll give you the stats. On the latest surveys in terms of cycling, in terms of who cycled in the last month, 39% of women said they did, 59% of men said they did.
Right, okay. Well, do you know, from what I see, I would really, really question that data, because that is absolutely not what I've seen. I mean, I've been out canvassing today, and I think I saw nothing but female cyclists. I'm not being, I'm not being blinded by my work there. So what can we do to, if that is the case, what can we do? Well, I think the situation with we're making huge inroads, and I've seen them in the time that I've been here in the last 4 going on 5 years. The cycleways are really, really opening up. It's a lot safer, and
10 seconds, Carl.
And really to get people, men, women of all ages and children off the roads into the cycle lanes, that will give us the air of security that we need for it to grow.
Thank you. That was a Government of Jersey survey. Right. Our next candidate this evening is Steve Pallett. Again, well known to parishioners across the island. Steve, what are your views on the circular economy and donut economics and its applicability to Jersey?
Right, well, it's luckily that I Googled that this afternoon, so I actually understand, I think I understand what it is. And I saw various diagrams telling me it was around reuse, refurbish, recycle, and the like. My first thought, actually, I wrote some answers down, and I'm not going to use them. My first thought was, actually, we do a lot of that now. I think we're good at as a community about recycling. I think we generally don't throw away things. Certainly don't, not like we used to, throw away things that we find useful and we find good uses for them. From a point of view of from my own perspective, I mean, I very much agree that recycling has been a way forward in Jersey. We've now got recycling schemes in most parishes. I introduced one in St Brellard's some 6 or 7 years ago, and others have followed from that. But I think it is important that that we do reuse, recycle, and refurbish rather than just throw away. We've been a throwaway society for far too long. Some parishes have been keener to follow than others. I think it's important that we all have an opportunity to play our part in recycling and refurbishing. You know, I have just finished a little project at home, and all the materials I used for that project were recycled. They were recycled off of other building sites. They were recycled from my favourite place to go and spend a Wednesday afternoon at Glencoe, because I think that's a good way to not use materials that could cost the environment even more than it does. I don't know what else I can say about the circular economy. I mean, it does affect other parts of life as well, certainly from a food security, food economy point of view as well. But I'm just going to maybe just finish off by saying environment is not my background. What I've had to do over the last few years is learn a lot more about it. Lucy was right. You know, we're not all experts in the economy. And we do need to learn more. The environment in my family is my wife, and I get earache virtually every night about something or other about the economy. So it's good to have people around that remind you of how important it is. But I'm still learning, and I've got a whole room here. I'm sure they want to teach me a lot more about the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our last candidate is James Corbett. This brings us back to our global impact around carbon and the carbon neutral roadmap. This is specifically about Scope 3 emissions. As you know, we measure carbon in Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. As a parish, what policies or strategies would you hope to implement in order to reduce Scope 3 emissions?
I find this very intimidating. People don't frighten me. You don't frighten me with respect. Any changes which we are going to introduce, and certainly any that take effect in 2050, will be after I'm dead. But I have children and I have grandchildren. And any scheme that we are asked to consider about the environment is not, for the most part, for us. It's for them. That perspective is essential. Now let me try and answer the question that's actually been asked. 2050 doesn't sound all that long away to me anymore. 28 years, carbon neutral. What can we do within my adopted parish for this purpose? St Brelard, largely, but not entirely, rural. Does it have its fair share by the exaggerated numbers of cars on this island? Does it have more than its fair share of vehicles? Absolutely. Is the construction of its houses any better or worse than anybody else's? Probably pretty much as bad as most other construction on the island. Is the planning by which permission is given to build those houses and other construction projects as loopy and inefficient as it is anywhere else on the island? Absolutely. So therefore, what is there to be done? The first thing is to believe that the whole project is worthwhile. The second is to listen to dissenting voices about carbon neutrality with respect. I do not understand what some of our environmental brethren and sisters think they will achieve by saying, "How dare you?" when a decision has to be made.
10 seconds, James.
My last point about that, I think, is simply this. If you want to bring people along, they have to know what the opportunities and the responsibilities they have are to their children and grandchildren. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for the candidates from St Brelads, and we'll bring in the next constituency. If you would like to go out that door, we'll bring in the next candidates by the other door. Thank you very much. So our next constituency is St John, St Lawrence and Trinity, the home constituency of Durrell, of course. If the candidates could come up, please. Okay, so the first question is for Elaine Miller. I haven't met Elaine. Elaine, hi. Hi, hi. And this is again around a circular economy. What initiatives would you put in place to encourage the adoption or transition to a circular economy for the island? The mic, yeah, thank you.
This microphone is going to be too high. I'll try. I think, like everybody else, as a new member, the element of power that you have to do anything is always going to be limited, and we all need to work with our colleagues to make sure that we can get appropriate initiatives in place that are effective for the island, effective for Jersey, and effective for each of the parishes. As far as the circular economy is concerned, I think it is something that we should all be working towards and aiming to reuse, reduce, recycle as much as we possibly can. I think a lot of the parishes already have great systems for recycling. I put my recycling out every single month without fail. I think it's a fantastic system. I think we need to maintain that. I think we need to make sure that we are also recycling things as much as we can. Particular things for me, things like fast fashion and clothing. I think we all need to start thinking carefully about what we buy to wear. In terms of, you know, recycled polyester is still recycled polyester, but it is still polyester. It is still going to be releasing microplastics into the environment. We need to try and avoid that. I think there are some tough choices with clothing. You know, if you're wearing vegan leather shoes that are actually made of a natural fabric that will decompose, but if the vegan leather shoes are plastic, then they are still part of the problem, which a lot of the ones that I've seen are. They are still part of the problem. They are not going to break down quickly, and to the extent they do break down, they are going to be releasing, again, plastics into the environment. So I think we do, and it'd be a very uncomfortable choice for some people, but I think we need to have very difficult choices and a reasoned debate about using things like leather and natural fibre and products that are byproduct of, you know, if sheepskin byproduct of the food industry, then I think we should be thinking about whether we use those products for clothing and other items instead of plastic. I think business is trying its best to move towards, again, a recycling attitude. There's lots of recycling schemes at work. In my last job, I realised we had little plastic cups, and I said, let's take those out, and people can use glasses, their own glasses and mugs. A week later, I found they had put paper cups in it instead, which wasn't quite what I'd expected. But I think everybody, we all just need to play our part and think carefully about what we're using, especially with plastic, and just make the best choices we can, and look for initiatives to increase these in Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question is for Hilary Jeune, and this is in reference to the Paris Agreement and COP26, the climate COP. So COP26 was the first time that Jersey delegates really participated with the conference, and obviously lots of agreements were made at that meeting. How do you plan to build relations with global delegates and to further play our part, your part, in meeting agreed targets? And how would you plan on Jersey expanding its impact and representation at the next COP?
Thank you very much for the question, Leslie. So actually, I was part of the discussions that the government did in leading up to going to COP and to actually have the Paris Agreement ratified to Jersey. As a consultant, I offered my services for that. And it was a very interesting process to go through that ratification and really understanding what the Paris Agreement means for Jersey. And there's a lot of things that then were taken from that and put into the carbon neutral roadmap. So I think the first thing we need to do to kind of, when we go back to the next COP, is to really say we've actually done, you know, we have had the roadmap agreed, and we've got some strong funding behind it, and we can really say we are willing and we're ready to meet those agreements and meet the head-on what you're asking us to do at COP. So that's the first thing. The second is the relationships and building the relationships with others at COP26. We're not part of the negotiations. That's the UK government who's leading on that. So it's really important that we keep the relationships strong with the government through our direct relationship with BEIS, who holds that in the UK government, but also with the British Irish Council, also with our link with the Commonwealth. I think that's really important that we push the Commonwealth countries as well to be part of the COP discussions and the Paris Agreement, and to support them also to deliver on their agreements. So there's many ways that we can, as Jersey, with the different relations that we have beyond the specific COP negotiations, that we can have an influence. It will be really important, I think, to carry on going to the COP. Of course, it was the UK that invited us last time. So we need to make sure that we're there and the UK delegation for next time, and that we show that we are committed and that we have a strong role to play. We have a strong role not just in Jersey and the things that we can do in Jersey to reduce our carbon, but also through the finance industry. I think that's really important that we have we build a sustainable finance industry, and that we can go to COP and really say we are on international level. We really want to make sure that we build a true sustainable finance industry that will feed into the discussions at COP and make the Paris Agreement successful. And we want to be part of that and celebrate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Our next candidate is Mary Venturini. This is a question around offsets, sometimes a controversial area, and it's about whether we should be investing in offsets as an island. So the question is, what is your opinion on this? Would you support the government of Jersey or your parish in producing a carbon offsetting policy?
I bet you asked me that because when I wrote my answer, I said that I didn't think that carbon offsets were perhaps the answer, and I imagine that you picked it up.
Perhaps.
Anyway, carbon offsets to me are that the rich countries are allowed to save and then sell on what they have not consumed to other countries who can then use them. Now, this is pretty controversial because some people can save on their carbon offsets and other people can't. And so you have it's not even a circular economy, this one. This is more that you've got well-off countries handing on to poorer countries. I don't think it would work in Jersey. I think that Jersey is possibly too small. It's probably got things that it's got to sort out before it gets into this rather complex situation of carbon offsets. One of the things that I would like to say is that there really is a climate emergency. It's not just climate change, it is a climate emergency. And we have got to do something about this. We can't just go on waffling any longer, saying we don't know, we haven't studied it. We have got to get down and put this on the top of the agenda. The other thing I'd like to say is that agriculture and the environment must work together. So often it has been a case of environmentalists saying that, oh, agriculture is the person, the industry that is causing all the problems. This is not true. In the last few days, I have researched this in Jersey to see what farmers actually are doing, and I have found out a lot of really interesting things of farmers, small organizations that are experimenting with the environment. And once we can get environmentalists and farmers working together, I think that will be much more satisfactory for the whole island. Farming is one of the traditional industries in Jersey, and I think it is something we have got to encourage, not in the way perhaps that it's been doing in the past on monocropping, huge, great conglomerates,
10 seconds, Mary.
UK conglomerates, but local, experimental farming. I'm afraid I've strayed from pop.
No, go. Now, very apt for our next question. You've set that up very nicely. So our next question is for Andy Howe, and it's about agriculture. Agriculture is a core part of Jersey's heritage, of our current economy, and of course, islanders' livelihoods, several islanders' livelihoods. We have part of the farming community I've seen in the audience tonight. So, what are your thoughts on the need to push further for sustainable farming practices and particularly policies that will encourage regenerative agriculture?
Good evening, everyone. Very good to see you, and thank you for the question. I am supporting our farmers and our agriculture because I think that has been the tradition of Jersey, and it is our future as well. We really rely on the farmers, not just to produce our food, our milk, but also they look after the land, they do all the broncages, they are there just to keep Jersey looking what we all want Jersey to look like. And I think we've got some really good young farmers who are experimenting with regenerative farming in Trinity. They've gone back to using a horse and a cart, and they're not ploughing really deeply. They're trying to improve the soil. They're trying to use sort of really good vrac on the soils. And I'm really passionate that we keep our traditions and we really look after the farmers. I don't think we should be just doing monocrop potatoes, but we need a vast array. And I think we're very lucky also because we've got Grow Jersey, which is encouraging lots of islanders who perhaps don't know about the soil and farming to go and to grow things, grow fruit, grow lots of vegetables, which we're going to need. But I'm a supporter. I know that Andrew Legalle's here, and he's got a great dairy farm, and we really appreciate all the work that he does, but it's not easy work. They're up very early in the morning milking, and they're up, they're working long hours, and we really need to support these people, our farmers, because they're doing a great job. And that's, and I think we should carry on, and we should really perhaps go back to some of the things that the people did in the past. But I think if I'm part of a government, we need to support our farmers and our agriculture, and also the marine farming. And our marine environment is vitally important too. And I think we should really help and think about what we're doing.
10 seconds,
there.
Andy.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We now come to our next candidate, a very familiar face, John Lafont, our current Chief Minister. John, this is back to a question we asked a little earlier. Energy supply and agency over the island's energy security. Exacerbated, obviously, last year by the fishing disputes. What is your stance on Jersey's current energy supply? Would you change it? And if so, how and why?
Thanks, oops. Sorry, trying to keep an eye on my time, actually. But anyway, thanks, Leslie. So, energy supply. As we know, at the moment, it's mainly a combination of nuclear and hydro, and predominantly comes from France, which, from a security point of view, is generally good. However, as we've also heard the threats in the past, politics, and also obviously what we're seeing in a slightly wider context with Ukraine and Russia, politics can sometimes threaten energy security, but we do remain in a good place, and actually it is protecting us from some of the significant increases we're seeing, particularly, for example, in the UK. Looking ahead, so actually we start from a good position. However, looking ahead, there's certainly a lot of discussion, and I think not being an expert, by the way, as a number of us are, I'm very much about listening to the experts, get the evidence and facilitate where we can. The message I get at the moment is whilst tidal, obviously we've got the third highest tidal range in the world, looks attractive in the future, the main aim at the moment seems to be around wind, and that seems to have potential. The issue with tidal at the moment, I'm told, is that technology isn't robust enough. If you have a force 9 gale that comes through and wrecks the technology, you as an island are in a bit of a difficult position. Obviously, we talked about solar and all the rest of it. You get into issues around how you feed the energy into the grid, and therefore making sure that, for example, the JEC can maintain the infrastructure when, for example, it's a cloudy day. But again, that's different issues around technology. So the fundamentals in terms of where we are at the moment, we're in a good position. I think in the longer term, we are going to have to take a position around some form of renewable, perhaps even more carbon neutral than what we've got, although there is sometimes a cost issue around that. And at the moment, the message I get is that is around wind. That is a longer term issue. It's around 10 to 15 years is where we are. In terms of security, that's someone we keep working on, and to date, we are in a good position. So I'm stopping there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Last but not least, our last candidate, Kirsten Morell. We're going to go back to one of the candidates' earlier questions. We asked Ian Gorst earlier. An outcome of COP26 was a global pledge to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. What role would you play in helping Jersey contribute to this pledge, despite the limited support for this pledge within the carbon neutral roadmap?
Thank you for that. And as an independent candidate, which I need to say at the very top of my speech, deforestation is not something that you automatically associate with Jersey and our ability to change things, but the finance industry is our link to deforestation. We have mining companies headquartered in Jersey. We have logging companies, I'm sure, headquartered in Jersey, or at least having some aspects here in Jersey. So our way to help with deforestation is absolutely right there in the finance industry. I know there are companies at the moment who are trying really hard to pick up the ESG initiatives and push that and promote that. But I think we can go further. I think we can actually build that into the regulation that we have of the finance industry. I think it's not just a matter of money laundering, know your client. It's also, what are you as a firm? What do you do to help this planet? That, for me, is a massive area that we can help, not just help with, we can lead with. And when it comes to COP26, that's also how we get to the table at COP26. We heard earlier about how we need to ask the UK, we need to maintain relations with the UK. That's absolutely correct. But how do we make sure we get our own seat at that table whilst not being a nation state? It's to say that we're playing a real part in solving the issue of deforestation, because we're pushing the firms that work out of Jersey, we're pushing them to change the way they operate, to make sure that they are not deforesting, to make sure that they are operating in an environmentally friendly manner wherever they are. And to be honest, that goes beyond deforestation. It's also about the way they treat their staff. It's also about the way they treat their local communities. I know that in Jersey there are firms operating in some of the most vulnerable countries in the world who are headquartered here. They have massive impacts. Some of them do really good work, some of them, I'm sure, not so good work. And we need our regulator to be looking at that and to be picking them up on that. That means a whole new concept in regulation. It means Jersey policing the firms that are operating out of Jersey in their operations overseas. But I think if we want to say to ourselves we're a world-leading finance centre, then we need to be world-leading not just in terms of finance, but in terms of the impact of that finance on the people around the world that
10 seconds,
are being affected by the companies in Jersey. So that's my little contribution.
A very popular answer in the room. That was the constituency of St John's, St Lawrence and Trinity. Thank you very much. And we'll have the next constituency, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to meet you. Now, our next constituency is St Helier North. You can see we have slightly less candidates. We have apologies for some of the other candidates who, for competing meetings tonight, were not able to attend. But thank you very much for the candidates who've come along this evening. Now, the first question is to Phil Romerell. Increased biodiversity and greenery can provide many physical and mental health benefits to users of an area, as well as a drawdown of carbon. What role would you play in implementing the greening of St Helier?
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. Should get to the mic first. First of all, I recently moved to St Helier, so I'm a resident in the area, and so I'm getting familiar with the challenges that the parish has got. I am, as some people may know, from a farming background and grew up in the parish of St John, surrounded by the greenery, the diversity that comes from a parish close to Maria Valley, and these wonderful areas which are very good for mental health and well-being. You'll be aware maybe from my candidature materials that I'm from a healthcare background. So this actually question is very useful from my point of view. Helping people's health and well-being on the island is an essential element of the next part of the government, next 4 years, and encouraging the biodiversity, encouraging the development of the environment, it will help people, but also increasing the accessibility to that will help as well. The comments earlier about transport, it's very interesting because I do some work with socially vulnerable people, and transport is a huge challenge. Getting people from their environment, whether it's in St Helier or any other area, into some of the beautiful scenery we've got around the green areas, but also the beaches, etc., will help that. Encouraging farming. Now, farming is one of those areas within our community that I've seen, along with tourism really, which has not had the same levels of investment from government to help the industry. And I would like to see the government produce more initiatives working with farmers to encourage growing different crops and areas to help that development. Also, one other area, we talked about deforestation recently. Mr. Morrell was talking about it. It is interesting. We have never been a particularly wooded area, so working with some of the marshlands, etc., and bringing back some of the natural fauna and floral materials that would have been there will actually help as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next candidate is Mariela Hegaret, and This is related to the fact that we live on a financial services island, an international finance centre. So the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is being developed now. It's endorsed by the United Nations, and in fact it has some of its roots from environmentalists working on this island who've helped in the process. It's a framework for risk management and how disclosures take place for organisations to report and act on their nature-related risks. This is mandated for climate already in a number of countries. Now, once this whole document is published in September 2023, would you support the adoption of mandatory introductions of nature-based financial disclosures for organisations based in Jersey, particularly within the finance sector? I'll repeat that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, there is a task force for climate-related financial disclosures. A number of countries, like the UK, they mandate that organisations of a certain size must publish what their risks are around climate, i.e. the impact they are having. The process is in place right now for nature-related financial disclosure. So, for example, a large bank operating on Jersey that is financing deforestation somewhere around the world, should they be forced by regulation to publish disclosures around their nature-related risk?
As you might have gathered, that was a little bit of a challenge for me, I should say. I would say yes, from the point of view that I would support it. I think if you look at any industries around the world, but particularly in Jersey, we should be open and honest about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So if we have a finance industry that is, for example, having areas where there is deforestation, then they should be actually telling people that, so that when people make choices about what they're going to do and which industries they're going to invest in, that they're fully aware of what those industries are doing. So I think from the point of view also as well, if you look at fuel, and there's been much debate over the last 4 years at times about organisations and where their money is invested. And then, of course, you look into the you delve into the actual sort of basis of where this money is invested, and you'll suddenly see that it's invested in fuel or in oil or in gas or something like that. So I do believe, as an island and within all our industries, that we need to have open and transparency about where the money is, what those industries are actually doing, and what impact they're having on a world environment. Because Jersey is a very small place, but of course we have a very big finance industry, and we're world known for our finance industry. So we need to make sure that when we're looked at, we're seen to be open and transparent. And of course that, if you look at it now, we actually do that from the point of view of money laundering. So we do that already from the point of view of money laundering. Where does the money come from? And we track it. So effectively, if we're saying, what we're saying here is what they're going to produce, is the fact that we ought to be open and transparent about what we're doing across the world and how we're affecting the environment across the world, so that we can actually stand up and say, actually, we won't be supporting deforestation. We're actually going to be investing in it as opposed to supporting it. So I would be fully supportive of that actual documentation.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Aina Gardner. Aina, this is a question we've asked some other candidates as well, but we think it's a really important one, so we want to ask it again and get another view. What are your views on the circular economy and donut economics and its applicability to Jersey?
Thank you very much for the question. And actually, circular economy is part of my published manifesto, because I do believe that the way forward to Jersey, if we encourage circular economy, everything can be thought twice how we are using, how we are reusing, how we refurbish, how we're bringing it back to the nature, to the land. For example, we had, and I hope we can continue, a machine that can take food waste, compost it, bring it back to the ground, and we'll grow food again. And these cycles are extremely important. I'm also aware there are some challenges with circular economy, and it's really important to adjust to the conditions of Jersey, to crops of Jersey, to climate of Jersey, and to Jersey needs. Also, when we are going with different type of legislation, for example, when we introduced the ban of the single-use bags, one of the bags that we could use, it's all loose fruits can now be sold in compostable, home compostable bag. And again, we take something, we're peeling our potatoes, putting that with, we can introduce also home compost in different households. And there are several businesses that using already compostable cups, but we don't have this facility in Jersey to actually compost, to bring. It's created from the plants, it's created from wastage, and it can be brought back to the soil. So for me, one of the very important policies that we would like to discover, to explore, and to introduce, it's circular economy, and I will connect it to the ecosystems. Ecosystems are always connecting health, environment, infrastructure, planning, and social policy. It's one system. We cannot tell that we will develop agriculture without thinking about social farming. So its holistic approach going forward will help to businesses, to charities, and to the people of Jersey. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, and we will now welcome the candidates for St Helier Central. Here they come. Good evening. Thank you. So our first question in this section refers back to what we talked about earlier. The war in Ukraine is causing significant problems across many different markets, including food supply and fertilizer supply. Protectionist policies in relation to food exports in countries like India is having an impact. And as an island, we have a very fragile food security position if we think about it in a kind of macro position. So our first question is to John Baker. What are your views on the island's level of food security? Would you change anything? If so, what do you want to change and how?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you watching online. Yeah, food security, a major problem, even if we didn't have the problems of Brexit and Ukraine, and we've had COVID as well, and we're likely, if we don't look after our environment, to have other problems. Food security is a problem. I mean, COVID itself would have been likely to have brought some levels of famine. Certainly, the climate change itself, as the planet heats up, the growth of crops, particularly in the middle strata of the planet, would cause problems, food shortages. So long term, we've got to consider improvements to the production of our own foods. Now, I started a charity called Earth Project Jersey some years ago when I realised the benefits that we could have by changing our old-fashioned farming methods. When I say old-fashioned, actually, I'd like to go right back to the time when we didn't use chemicals. And as the world moves towards what is now called, and you've heard the word tonight, regenerative farming practices, that is chemical-free farming, and going back to low-till and less use of the tractor and practically no chemicals. I mean, from the point of view of St Helier, and it's something I've campaigned on for a long time,
the fact that we have to suffer the sea lettuce, which is caused by the heavy nitrates that are put on the land. The reason for the heavy nitrates is, of course, that we've got a lot of UK companies that are just interested in the weight of the crops. And the Jersey Royal, the quantity of nitrates that's put on the land now to increase the yield, not the quality of the crops. If you want good quality potatoes, we all go and buy them off the wall at Latac, where they obviously just use seaweed. They don't use chemicals. And there's other farms, Amityville Farm, that is moving to regenerative. But regenerative farming isn't just about not using chemicals. It's about diversifying the crops. It's about using holistically not just plants, but also animals. So particularly smaller farms can use a mixture of rotating crops and animals, and even on a small scale, for instance, in your own garden. If you've got a decent-sized garden, if you're lucky enough in the countryside to have that, you can have a vegetable plot. You can maybe keep chickens. And the chickens, if you keep them in a chicken coop and move the coop around the garden, fertilise the soil. So we need to move forward to regenerative farming that will sustain Jersey in producing its own crops. And I would encourage every one of us that's got the capability to grow your own veg. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our next question is for Rob Ward. And we have cheekily pinched this question from our colleagues at the Blue Marine Foundation, who many of you will know are working with organisations like the National Trust for Jersey to try and safeguard and look at our marine environment. So from their briefing, How to Make Jersey a Marine Sustainability Leader in Europe, the proposed protected marine area was rejected by the current States Assembly, despite its sequestration and biodiversity potential. How did you vote on the recent Marine Spatial Plan proposition? Why did you vote in the way that you voted? And if elected, how would you develop protection of the marine environment going forward?
Okay. Evening, everybody. First of all, I voted for the Blue Marine Park. I thought it was the right thing to do, and I voted for it because it offered a way forward in terms of carbon sequestration and also to protect our marine environment surrounding our island. What happened, I believe, in the debate was we went down what happens quite frequently in the Assembly, a number of rabbit holes about other issues, about fishing and whether we'll be able to fish, what's happened in the past, issues with agreements and so on. But what was lacking was the leadership from government, which we can offer in the future to say, actually, let's look at the resources that we have. So what's important? Why is that important? Well, one of the things we have to do is recognise that we are a small island, but that doesn't mean we're insignificant, and it doesn't mean that our marine environment is insignificant that surrounds us. I've had the pleasure to be involved in a small islands group on climate change with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and just very quickly, speak to somebody. I had the pleasure of speaking to somebody in an island called Kiribati in the middle of the Pacific, and if you wonder about a genuine threat to your existence, the highest level of their island is 1 metre above sea level, and they have a real risk to their island. But what they're doing is taking measures to protect the marine environment, the same in other islands around the world. To understand our marine environment as an island, we need to be communicating across islands and small islands and setting up that network and bringing together people who know, people who can actually make a change. And then the States Assembly has to take action. We talk about it a lot, but we don't take action. It took 3.5 years to get a bus pass passed. That's a ridiculous amount of time for something that's right. And this was the similar thing with the marine park. The marine park is not a threat. This is not a threat to our fisheries. It's not a threat to the fishing industry. It's not a threat to agriculture or aquaculture on this island. What it is a protection long-term and long-term thinking. And when we talk about climate and we talk about our environment, we desperately need long-term joined-up thinking. I was a science teacher, but I don't understand all of the science. However, all of us need to take on board the genuine science behind what's happening and the genuine drivers behind protecting our marine environment and our land environment linked to it. If you think we're too small to matter, try sleeping with a mosquito. That's what I would suggest we do. Thank you.
are you, Catherine? Catherine, yeah, okay, thanks. Our next candidate is Catherine Curtis. This references our small size. As an island that's 9 by 5 miles, it is reasonable to suggest that Jersey could be a hub for innovation and to be used as an innovation test bed for things like electric cars, hydrogen vehicles, e-micro-mobility vehicles, etc. What are your views on this, and what would you do to develop this opportunity for the island?
Good evening. I love to talk about innovation. I've been somebody who's developed products myself in the past. And I am interested in the environment. It's very important to me. I studied it as a degree. I think Jersey has the ideal opportunity to develop new products and be a test bed for new technologies because we are small, we have wealth, we have our own government, so we can quite easily make our own plans. And I think for one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, I would like to see hydrogen power plants possibly as a test in Jersey to see how well that would do. I think actually we're lucky that we have the JEC because they are open to new ideas, and although we have already very low carbon electricity, they are looking at offshore wind farms, and they've done a lot of solar power developments as well. So this is all reasons why we can do new projects in Jersey. I think, just trying to think of what else, we've got a community of people who is very motivated, often working long hours in voluntary work. So I do think we're ideal for test beds for new technology. I think that's it really. I've just, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we have the ideal opportunity here.
Thank you. Thank you. And our last candidate for the constituency of St Heliers Central is Neil Kilby. And this is about financing the future. In trying to reach net zero by 2050, one must question where the responsibility lies to fund this task and what level of financial support we will be given to tackling the climate emergency. The carbon neutral roadmap sets out an initial set of costed policies to work towards reaching net zero by 2050. The Assembly has declared a climate emergency. However, it is currently not allocating the appropriate funds internally within the Government of Jersey to deliver on this. What would you do to ensure that the carbon neutral roadmap receives appropriate funding to reach net zero by 2050? Thank you.
Good evening. It's nice to be back at Durrell Wildlife. I worked here about 15 years ago in the finance department, and it's quite incredible the work that goes on off-island and the pragmatic way that the people are introducing policies when they are in the local areas, because what they do is they make sure that they work with the community to achieve the basic result that we're all after. So when we come back around to financing what's going to happen in Jersey, for me it's incredibly important that it's in Jersey. So being in St Heliers Central, we have a massive issue with vehicles being driven through our area to get to schools, and it's about one of the only places in the island where we do have an air quality issue. So I'm fundamentally, I would love to have had the question previously about innovation and vehicles, because it would be absolutely superb to be one of the leaders in the world in having driverless vehicles here, so that we can reduce the amount of vehicles in total that we have, because they're used for about 5% of a day. So to have them just sitting there in car parks, roads, we've got car parks and roads and cars themselves just taking up all of the space. So I want to see us moving very much towards e-bikes, because that gets us up hills Okay, I mean, traditionally I'm a cyclist and don't like e-bikes, but it does get people up hills. So that's what we need, is policies like that which are going to be genuinely effective in Jersey and working in Jersey. So that the result is that we reach net zero ourselves. And the vehicles is a big issue for me because it also includes the fact that it takes up space in for which we live. So if you walk through the streets of St Helier Central, it's cars everywhere. And if you look in St Helier, we've got monuments to cars in big car parks. If you go outside of St Helier and go to the lovely places where everybody else who works in the finance industry works, it's lovely, loads of greenery and lots of access. So for me, the fundamental issue is for us as an island is actually in St Helier Central, where the quality of life is affected by vehicles. And so that's the area that I would fundamentally be looking at. So that's me done.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Okay, thank you very much for the candidates for St Helier Central. What we are going to do right now is take a small comfort break. I can see the other candidates are eager. We're going to take a small comfort break, allow you all to maybe stretch your legs, maybe get a cup of tea or a drink of water. Our viewers at home, make a cup of tea. And then we'll be back with the next constituency. So if you could all be back promptly in 10 minutes, 1955. Thank you. Yeah. David's. Yeah. Yeah. Judy's ill. She is sent her apologies. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, our viewers at home, I hope you've rejoined us and not switched over to something like EastEnders. This is far more dramatic, I'm sure, here this evening. We're going to move on now to the constituency for St Heliers South. Again, the format remains as it was. So the first question is to Sam Mesick, and it's around finance and our finance industry. So the UK has ambitions to become the first ever net zero aligned financial centre. It's clear that as a financial services island, there's space for us at this table, given our expertise and the progress that we are beginning to see in the sector. Sam, how do you plan to support Jersey's finance industry in collaboration with the UK to provide a solution in their decarbonisation journey?
Thank you. I'm really pleased with this question because it is something that we touch upon in Reform Jersey's election manifesto, and it's something that we've gone out of our way to meet with people in the industry to talk about this, because it's a really exciting opportunity to take our dominant industry in the island and help use it to do something that's not just good for Jersey, but actually good for the world as well. When it comes to climate change and the biodiversity crisis, the writing is on the wall, and we are going to see more and more countries and more governments wake up to this and know that they've got to take action in their jurisdictions as well, and more businesses are going to have to take action as well. And Jersey punches above its weight internationally. We've got people here who advise on massive business deals around the world and who do international deals, and there's a lot of scope there for applying a green lens on investments, helping those businesses make sure that what they're doing is good for the world, that they're not inadvertently taking part in projects which are harming the environment, putting their money in things that may actually become stranded assets because of technology changing, us moving away from fossil fuels, etc. So we've got a lot of talent and expertise in that industry here, and if we can, as a government, work with the industry to support them, if there's bits of regulation of the industry that need to be changed here to make that kind of stuff more easy, then we've got to be open to that, and we've got to be nimble. And the added benefit to that is, if we support the industry to do that work and generate wealth as a result of it, we've then got revenue as a government to plough into what we're doing on island for our own targets in reducing our carbon emissions, whether that is going to be on some of the things we're looking at as a party. We're looking at supporting people moving to low carbon heating. We're looking at our transport network as well. So all of that is interlinked, and if we're doing a good job on that locally, we can project that outwards. And if we're supporting the industry to do that work and bring wealth to the island as a result of the services we provide, we've then got a funding stream to be able to do all of that on island as well. So it's particularly exciting, and we're wholeheartedly behind that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Russell Labbe. This is about energy and heating. So the transformation of energy systems to low carbon is fundamental to decarbonisation. Jersey's electricity source is already largely low carbon. However, a number of islanders' homes are run or heated using fossil fuels, such as oil or gas. There's a very large infrastructure cost associated with that switch to electric and low carbon systems. The carbon neutral roadmap has outlined policies to support the installation of residential low carbon heating systems. However, the proposed subsidies only cover a fraction of the cost of switching. And of course, many islanders don't own their own home and they're in rented accommodation, so the choices are not theirs as well. If you secured your seat in the Assembly, what would you do to support the switch to low carbon heating systems for residents on the island?
That's very definitely the direction of travel, and I have supported all the initiatives that have come to the Assembly on carbon neutrality. Proud and pleased to do that. As Housing Minister, what I've been trying to do is drive the more widespread use of MMC, modern methods of construction, which are cleaner, greener, far better in terms of energy efficiency, and very, very much labour intensive. So we're talking about modular housing constructed elsewhere and brought here either volumetrically, in large units, if we can do it with our roads, or in a kit form. And I remember setting up a working party for this a few months ago, and there was a few raised eyebrows. Why are you doing this? Shouldn't industry just be doing this? And I think no. I think government needs to facilitate the use of MMC big time and try to lead the way. And so we went 2 months ago. I was in Poland. I took one of the SOJDC managers with me and the chief minister. We visited an extraordinary factory building proper volumetric modern modular units, which we could effectively crane off the boat if we use them in the waterfront and crane onto where they're going to be. And I'm pleased to say that we were all blown away by it, and especially the SOJDC representative. And I think that we've got to embrace it, because it's probably the way that we are going to meet our ambitious targets to double effectively the annual average house production from 400 and something to 800 and something. That's what we planned to from the last decade to this one. And I think MMC, modern methods of construction, are the way forward, and they're built energy efficient. The biggest problem is that people don't believe in it yet. You say modular, people think of prefab and the post-war prefab, some of which are still standing, mind you. This is in a different category. It's much more sophisticated, and I'm trying to drive that forward as much as I can.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next candidate is Chris Hopkins. This is back to this question about active travel and the gap between males and females in active travel. How would you address that gender gap to encourage active travel? But more generally, how will you encourage cycling for all young people on the island? Because, of course, like every environmental issue, it cross-cuts with other issues like health.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's not as bad as it could have been, having seen tonight's questions. In relation to gender transport, you'd have to break down these figures to find out exactly why this scenario is. The first thing, having only heard it tonight, the first thing that I thought may be that the mothers are transporting the children to school and the man is cycling because they've only can afford one vehicle, which is going back to cost of living, going back to housing, which is really the strongest points in the election this year. In relation to how would I even that out, the only way you can even that out is to improve the safety on the roads, because there are an awful lot of accidents involving push bikes, motorbikes, which are the cheaper, leaner transport. In relation to electric vehicles that we spoke about earlier, the infrastructure is not really there yet. The government are going to have to subsidise that. Some of the suggested housing developments that are being put into place and we are trying to push forward with, they all have to have sustainable electricity built into them. They have to have charging points available, either in the premise or outside the premise. There's an awful lot of people in Jersey that live in apartments. They can't plug in their electric car outside the door. They can't get rid of their oil-fired boilers because they haven't got them. They have only got what the landlord gives them. So the government will have to drive that change, as was mentioned earlier. They're going to have to subsidise and they're going to have to enforce those changes if you're going to change the island, which is really what we want to do. Now, the only last point before I finish is that we're talking about the roadmap. We're talking about 2030. We're talking about 2050. I'm not. I want to serve this island for 4 years. So by 2026, I want to see results. I want to see us nearly there. We don't want to put it off to the next government who will be telling you exactly the same. It's got to be done in 4 years. We've got 8 years. We need to use those first 4 productively and efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next candidate is David Moore. And this is related to quite a conundrum for the island, I think, and that's waste and how we tackle the waste. So waste is a growing issue. We have a highly consumptive society, like all of Western society. It's incredibly consumptive. What are your views around parish recycling, and what would you do to develop recycling rates within your parish if elected?
Hello, everybody. So, recycling. I don't know if you're familiar with our business, but we are coffee roasters, and one of the elements that we have to always think about is, where is our waste going? Is it going into the central waste, or can we actually recycle some of the waste from the products that are byproducts of making a cup of coffee, for instance? So that'll be things like the grounds from coffee, maybe being collected by somebody and using as fertilizer. We're using sacks being used by people who want to use them for parties, gorillas up here, for instance, those kind of areas. So we're very conscious that we're trying to minimize the amount of stuff that we're dumping into the green bins which are around the island. My biggest concern right now, as far as waste is concerned, is that we have a very fragmented system. We have a very parochial system with lots of different vehicles on the island, all doing exactly the same thing, when surely it's not beyond the wit of man to bring in one centralized format. Spoke to the parish of St Helier the other day, for instance. La Colette are doing some recycling streaming. The parish are doing another level of streaming. So how come we have two close together departments not functioning in one clean and clear-cut way? I think what we lack is vision. This is something I feel hasn't been spoken about today, is vision. We don't have a vision of what I would call that North Star. Where are we headed to? What can we actually do? What can we actually deliver at an affordable rate? Recycling is not just simply about circular economies. It's also about, can we get some return on it? Those cans, can we add value? I know the parish of St Helier, for instance, are sending some of their waste over to France, where they're getting some value out of that. That value can come back into our community and then improve the situation within the island. So, like so many things on this island, and so many things, and one of my visions is one St Helier and many communities and many ideas. And the idea is that we think about the whole rather than the parts. And this is where we need cross-party, cross-governmental departments working together to come together with one vision. We need a clear vision, and I'm hoping if I get elected, that'll be one of my great desires to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all the candidates. We were hoping to have Judy Martin with us. Judy was planning to be here this evening. Unfortunately, she's taken ill, and she does send her apologies. So we only have our 4 candidates here. But just on that point, we are running a little bit ahead of time because the candidates are all been fabulous at keeping to time. So if we have time towards the end, when we've met all the candidates, what I would like to do for the candidates who are still here and been able to remain, some have had to leave to go to other meetings, I'd like to bring everyone back and open to the floor. So we will try and do that if we have time to do that. But just to make you aware, some of the candidates have had to leave to go to other meetings. It's not a reflection that they don't think this is important. It's simply, it's an election season and everyone is very busy. But thank you to the candidates here. Thanks.
Thank you.
So our next candidates, we've actually grouped 2 constituencies together just because of the number of candidates that were available this evening. So we're going to hear from candidates from St Saviour, Grouville and St Martin. And our first question is to Jonathan Channing for St Saviour. And it's about sustainable transport. So Sustainable Transport Week was a great success with schools adopting things like walking buses, walking through town to school. Of course, that also has health benefits for children. So this week has proven, if you were, that if you put the appropriate procedures in place, it can be a success. What are your views on things like walking routes to school on an island where sometimes there's a lack of pavements? And what would you do to develop this within your parish? How would you implement that? And what would be your priority for developing safer walking routes to schools, but also, I think, for all of us?
It's a great question, and I'll thank you very much for that. I think ultimately we've got a great parish in St Saviour. I'm pleased to be here as one of the 3 standing deputies for St Saviour, showing that I do care about the environment and environmental issues. Now, I'm going to give a very layman's example of this because it's by no means my expertise, and that's what I will talk to many more experienced people about to really understand how we can achieve this. But for me, there almost needs to be a behavioural change. So something I'm very passionate about is looking at how we create that behavioural change element in terms of what we want to do. So I would look to actually start to incentivise the travel, you know, get kids excited about walking to school. But then we must provide the path they're going to walk. And there's opportunities. I think some of the cycle tracks, you know, could be a bit more pedestrian friendly. And we could, you know, maybe not have these quite large cycle tracks for well, it's important that we do look after our cyclists, but pedestrians are important too. And we must look after the pedestrians, especially in the parish of St Saviour. I really do feel that this has to come from education. How are we going to actually get into the schools and start showing people what the safe paths are? Because otherwise it's going to be a hazard. We've got to really help young people to feel safe on their routes to school and to really appreciate and start to appreciate the nature around them and the beauty of the parish of St Saviour. I can't really say much more, I don't think. It's something that's, but yeah, let's make Jersey an island in which we have the most sustainable transport. We need better bus service. We need to do more. And I'm, you know, I'm standing here as a layman, and that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Okay, our next candidate is Louise Dublet. Dublet or Dublet? Dublet. And this goes back to that question around our Scope 3 emissions and relating to carbon. So the Carbon Neutral Roadmap is promoting low carbon lifestyles, and the government will develop and deliver an education and engagement programme to help islanders to reduce their off-island Scope 3 emissions. As a parish, what policies or strategies would you hope to implement in order to reduce Scope 3 emissions? So Scope 3, so Scope 1 and 2 are the things that we have control of. Scope 3 are assets that are not owned or controlled by ourselves or by organisations. So Scope 3 might be, for example, supply chains in the food that we buy, where the construction materials coming from that another company is using to do road repair in the parish. So it's those long, far-off looking emissions that are actually quite hard to measure.
Do my best to answer this question. So I think education is key, and I'm here to learn as well as to answer the questions. I feel like I've already learned a great deal this evening. And Scope 3, so in terms of personal responsibility and looking at the wider world, I think in terms of what we can do as citizens, we have to first of all, we need to start at home and think about what we're doing at home and in our community nearest to us. And of course, that would include the parish. So I think the best way to start with this is actually by engaging children. And I think I'm not an environmentalist by profession, or you know, my profession is teaching, and actually the thing that got me interested in the environment is the passion that the children are showing for it. So I think that anything that's driving us towards being better, either on a personal level or wider afield, we need to listen to what the children are saying. And I think around 70–80% of children are worried or very worried about climate change. And I think as adults, sometimes because we haven't grown up with that worry, we don't have the same level of understanding about it, and whereas children do. So I think working perhaps with school groups and getting the children in perhaps to talk to some of the adults in the parish and just engaging that way can help to kind of change minds a little bit, and I think that we actually need to wake up to some of these things. I've learnt terms here this evening that I hadn't heard before, and I know that there are lots of things that I need to educate myself in, and all I can say is that I will continue to educate myself and learn about these things. In terms of my voting pattern, I've always supported all of the green initiatives that other members have brought, and I have tried to do some myself. So, for example, making sure that developers consider green spaces when they are building new developments. That's something I put into the island plan. And also making sure that when the hospital access route was considered, that if any trees had to be felled, that local tree experts were consulted, and that we're not just replacing 50-year-old oak trees with a single kind of baby tree. We need to be thinking about the wider implications and the biodiversity. And yeah, so education is key. And I hope to learn a lot more about this, and in favour of action in that area.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next candidate is Philip Osef. And this is a question, of course, that would be near and dear to the heart of Durrell. What measures will you put in place during the next term, if elected, to ensure that biodiversity will be protected and enhanced on Jersey?
Well, that's a detailed one for a farmer's son. First of all, I think that biodiversity, I listened to the climate change strategy in the States, and it was sort of a juxtaposition at the last 2 weeks of the States. I think climate change and net zero is terribly important, and I was sorry that the States debate brought by the Alliance-led government actually was pigeonholed in basically just simply it was a few hours of debate. Actually, I would have preferred that carbon neutral strategy debate and all the issues, including biodiversity, to actually have been considered by the new Assembly because it's so important. Biodiversity was introduced as an issue right at the last minute in the island plan. Biodiversity, I didn't actually see biodiversity mentioned really at all in any prominence in any of the selections for the island plan. Biodiversity is, of course, massively important. I'm not an expert in it, but I know there are some. I know there were some biodiversity experts, such as Angela Gullet and other people around here. As far as St Saviour is concerned, I would say that we can improve our biodiversity by planting more hedgerows, planting more trees, creating more wildlife corridors. I want to see more people, we talk a lot about getting people out of their cars. Try on some of our St Saviour's roads having a safe walk to school or to work through some of our roads that don't even have a pavement. Well, we've got a good example on where I live in Rue de Tapon. There's a good example in St Mary's where a road, where a pathway has been put in the field with a hedge. Lovely hedge, a beautiful way, a safe way of working, biodiversity being created along those wildlife corridors that can be having electric bikes, etc. Roll out a plan of that would be a very good thing to do. In terms of, I would like to have an arboretum for Jersey. There's something that's coming out in my manifesto. I think there should be we haven't got an arboretum in Jersey. We should have an arboretum where we have trees planted in memory of all of those people. Maybe that's a future liberation project, to have a tree planted in memory of, in recognition of everybody who perhaps didn't come back to Jersey or whose family could do it. Trees produce biodiversity.
10 seconds, Philip.
Does that get Does that get a biodiversity point? But actually, on agriculture, we need to grade our land as well in terms of biodiversity. We don't currently grade land. I know Andrew's, I think, nodding. We don't grade land in terms of its quality. It's not only agricultural production, it's actually the quality of biodiversity.
Okay, thank you.
My other answers are hopefully going to be put on the website.
We will.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to what is my parish, but of course I'm entirely neutral in this debate. So that's Grouville and St Martin. First we're going to hear from Piers Sangan. Many of you will know Piers. He is a biodiversity environmental expert and works... No, not at all. Not at all. But let's talk finance. Back to that question of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures endorsed by the UN. Very important piece of work being done right now. It's going to be officially published in September 23. Do you support the adoption of mandatory disclosures of nature-based risk for organisations based in Jersey, particularly within the finance sector?
Well, I knew I was going to be set up for a fall. I do support this, but I'm going to caveat that. We've got a big problem in our island with businesses, particularly small businesses, suffering from red tape. So when we look at these projects, particularly with the finance industry, yes, they are big organisations, and that can be easily included. However, for something as important as actually assessment of the risk to nature from a business, that's actually something that shouldn't just be within the financial sector, and it should also be something that the States Assembly adopts when it actually brings forward any proposition to the Assembly. You do that for social, you do that for economic. All propositions kind of need to have this basis of what is going to be the impact. And as an Assembly moving forward, we need to bring forward a nature one and a biodiversity one. What are the implications of any proposition we bring forward? So as much as I think, yes, businesses should do it, and we do have businesses that operate here on the island, but also operate globally, they should be able to report. If that is introduced as a soft voluntary, I think that's a great first option, because businesses then have the opportunity to also report on what they do. Because going out and saying mandatory straight away, the businesses don't have the information to start with over what their impact is. So we're starting from a blank playing field. We don't know what's good, what's bad. We can see it. If someone's chopping down a whole rainforest, we'll probably go, that's bad. But there are other industries where the impacts on nature might be a lot more subtle. So I think mandatory, yes, in the future. I think that's a great target to aim for. But I also think voluntary is also something that we should start working with, not waiting for the documents to start coming out, but the consultation's there. We can start having the discussions with these industries on island, and we should also look at how we can integrate it into the smaller business sector without introducing new red tape, and into the States Assembly, so that every decision we make as an Assembly, we are assessing whether it's going to affect our biodiversity and our environment.
And last but not least, for Grouville and St Martin, is Carolyn Labbe. This is around renewable generation of energy. So smaller scale renewable generation presents a decentralized solution that is different to the centralized import and distribution model that we currently have. The potential transition from centralized to decentralized systems presents both financial and infrastructure challenges to electricity suppliers. How do you think the relationship between the main grid and distributed generation technologies at the household level needs to be managed?
Well, thank you for that. As you know, I'm not an expert, so I'll give it my best shot. I actually brought a proposition to the States a couple of years ago now, which asked for our Jersey electricity laws to be updated. They were dated 1933. So renewables weren't even a concept then. I don't even think electricity was, but So we've had the, we are having the Jersey electricity laws updated. And also it gives us the opportunity to develop policies that include renewables, the concept of renewables. So that's a start. I did come up against quite a tough fight, actually, with Jersey Electricity because I was challenging their standby charge. I felt it was unfair for them to be charging a standby charge, especially to people that are feeding into the grid, and their buyback tariffs do not incentivize anyone. So we have an issue here, and I believe that we ought to develop policies within the states. So when we have developed our renewable policy, it aligns with the JEC, and so they can see what government are trying to achieve. We own Jersey Electricity Company, we own 62% of it. So it's a very difficult situation to be in because we don't own it outright. However, we do have the majority share, and I really do think that our policies, whatever we decide, JEC needs to align what they are doing with our policies, not the other way around. As I said, there's no incentive for people to set up. You know, solar panels are incredibly expensive to put on roofs, but it's an investment worth making. However, when the buyback tariff isn't incentivizing anyone, that is not good. So
10 seconds, Caroline.
Okay, I think we really need to look at how we can feed into the grid. I think the company, I think the island needs to own the grid, and then the electricity company can operate on a commercial level, but we need to own the grid, not the company. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much to the candidates for St Saviour, Grouville and St Martin. And we're going to move on to our final constituency. Thank you very much. Okay, so our first question goes to Alex Curtis. And it's getting back to that question of waste on this small island and how we tackle it. It's a growing issue in this consumptive society, a highly consuming society. What are your views on parish recycling as they stand? What would you do to increase recycling rates within your parish?
Well, I think when we look at this question that we've heard, and we have the benefit right now of being the last group to go up, I think what struck me was answering this at a parish level isn't enough. And I think David mentioned this earlier, referring to how recycling should be something we look at an island level as well. But I think if we look at the part of consumption here, I think this is also resounding how we need to look at the culture in Jersey. If we want to improve recycling facilities, we might have to look at using less. So looking at the kind of bottles we use, and it comes back into the circular economy. Looking at perhaps, are we purchasing the right items that can be recycled and that can't be recycled? We can look at schemes such as those that we used to have in Canada and New Zealand and that the Europeans have, in which products have to form standardized forms. So bottles, the Canadians had a stubby. And this was about a circular economy that actually minimized recycling to start with and looked at reusing, where we standardize on these. With regards to the parish, I know that St Clement can do more for recycling. Maybe that's why this question has come to us as well. And I would support looking at areas in the parish we can provide drop-off facilities. And I'm interested in where we can work on curb recycling as well. But I think it comes back to, you know, when I was growing up, it was all about reduce, reuse, recycle. And actually, if we're going to start with the question of recycling, I think that will come last here. I would like to see us reduce, and that will be looking at our economy and how we actually move from an import-driven model of consumption and enjoying the big brands and actually looking at the smaller farmers we have, the smaller producers. I actually, to give an example, in my distillery, I offer a bottle return scheme, which I've done for 6 years. And that's actually a bottle that never has to be recycled. It can be returned every time. So I would suggest it's an important question. We need to improve recycling, but far more importantly, we need to change that model of consumption, looking at reduction and looking at on-island production as a means to actually being far more sustainable.
Thank you. So now we're coming to the battle of the sirs. Sir Philip and Sir Mark. I'm going to ask you the same question, actually. So we're going to start with Mark, and this is around energy and heating. The transformation of energy systems to low carbon is fundamental to decarbonisation. Jersey's electricity source is low carbon. However, a large number of our homes on the island are run and heated using fossil fuels like oil and gas. There is significant infrastructural costs associated with the switch to low carbon systems across the island's residential homes. And the carbon neutral roadmap has outlined policies to support the installation of residential low carbon heating systems. However, the subsidies only cover a fraction of the cost of that switch. If you secured your seat in the Assembly, what would you do to support the switch to low carbon heating systems for residents on the island? And we'll come to Sir Philip after you for the same question.
Well, thank you very much. I was hoping you would ask a question about recycling, as both Philip and I would say that we're recycled politicians. You know, clearly that's a really important issue you've raised. And the costs here are quite substantial. And picking up what I've heard from some of the other comments tonight, there is the assumption that it's very expensive, but it's fine, the government's going to pay for it. Well, where do you think the government gets its money from? The government is not going to pay for anything. The people of Jersey are going to pay for it. So looking at the sort of figures we're talking about to replace the nasty boilers by the nice one, the figure that's in the report is about £10,000. And the subsidy is £5,000. So that means that people are going to have to spend £5,000 of their own money, and then the people are going to spend £5,000 as well, and it may be their money, it may be somebody else's. My problem with the carbon roadmap, having read it and tried to understand it, it doesn't cost any of these things. It merely gives the cost to the government, not the cost to the public. And we need to consider the cost to the public very carefully, given the pressure that people have got at the moment on their standard of living because of a very high rate of inflation. So to me, the answer is not, yes, more government subsidy. That doesn't alter the cost by 1 penny. The cost will come down over time as technology improves, and we need to take advantage of that. But we need to think through very carefully what we're asking people to do. And they need to know up front, this is going to cost money, here is the benefit, this is the cost, and you, the Jersey public, are going to pay for it. Some of it you're going to pay directly yourself, and some of it you're going to pay for by increased taxation. So what I really want to see is all of these figures in the analysis laid out very clearly, and the distributional impacts also indicated clearly. We do not want low-income people to be forced to spend a lot of money they do not have. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir Philip.
I'm not sure whether it's a good thing to go second or first, actually. And I must say, by way of introduction, that I've been involved in a number of hustings over the course of my political career. And I think that these are the most difficult questions that I've ever come across in my life. I would much prefer to have been asked on this occasion about the best way to deal with transport, because that in itself is a great problem, but I think it's one which is much more easily dealt with than the problem of heating, which, as Mark has said, is something which is going to be extraordinarily expensive, both for householders and indeed for the states or for the government. I think the only way in which it can sensibly be approached is to take advantage of the fact that we have changed the original aspiration of becoming carbon neutral or zero carbon by 2030, and we have very sensibly put it back to 2050, because I think that this is something which can be much more readily and much more sensibly addressed over a period of time. People who are told that they have to change their heating systems from oil to some renewable source need to have time to plan that. And I think it's much better to be able to think that this is something that you can deal with in 2030 or in 2035, rather than something that is sprung upon you to deal with over the course of a few years. I agree with the previous speaker that this is something which is going to have to be paid for both by individual families and to an extent by the taxpayer, because it is something that is going to involve a very considerable expense. I think there are 45,000 homes in the island, and quite a substantial number of those will have heating systems which are going to need to be changed. So take it over a period of time, I think, is my summary.
Thank you. And the very last of the set questions this evening. Thank you, Barbara, for being so patient. Barbara Ward, our last official candidate question this evening. We hope we'll get to some of your open questions in a moment. And this is the question that Sir Philip wanted to answer. It's the transport sector question. So we know it's the largest source of emissions on island. 32% of emissions come from the transport sector, from road transports. What do you believe are the key areas within the transport sector that need addressing in order to achieve a reduction in emissions, but also benefit the islanders?
I don't know whether it's better to go first or to go last, but anyway, it's what it is. From a transport point of view, I think the large companies, the users that are the frequent users on the roads need to address about using greener fuels in some respect. The tunnel, I mean, that is just full of emissions. I mean, the air quality is absolutely dreadful. So the frequent transport users, the buses, lorries, taxis, I think they should all be looking at low emissions and better fuels. I think that's about it, really. I'm just short and sweet.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to do now, because we do have a little bit of time, we're on good time, I'd like to ask the other candidates who are in the green room if they could come back in now. We want to open the floor up to, I think we've got time for 2 questions. It could be targeted at any candidate. We don't have time for all the candidates to answer, but as a reminder, all the questions you've heard this evening, we will make public. So we will give you the opportunity, if you want to ask your specific candidates in your constituency about some of the questions you've heard this evening, or add to them yourself. So, do we have any questions in the audience for any of the candidates? And could you say which candidate you would like to answer the question? Or have we covered everything? Slider's not working right now. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I've got a comment.
Okay.
It's, if you all look to your right, you'll see a picture of an animal there. And I've questioned why we have hosted this at Durrell, considering there hasn't been much mention of rainforest deforestation or anything like that. It's a bit disappointing to hear that. I would have wanted a little bit more of people to talk about what we're going to be doing for the animals and nature, not just always thinking about our immediate selves.
Well, I would give that as the host of this evening.
Thank you.
So that's Amari, our baby gorilla. Actually, what we do around things like climate, financial disclosures, the way we manage waste, that has implications globally, even though we're a tiny little island. And also, we were very careful. We're the hosts. It is not our job to specifically ask questions we want. We want it to be quite neutral in this process, to be fair to the candidates as well. I will have my own questions for the candidates at a later point, I'm sure. But what we do on this island does have an impact globally. If we think about that deforestation and imported deforestation, the impact of our finance centre, how we use mobile phones, all affects this animal in the wild. So it does have an impact. So, you know, for reasons of neutrality, we didn't want to overly weight the questions to things that Durrell likes. So that's what we did. Okay, do we have another question for the candidates? We got the mic there, thanks.
Obviously, there's a few potential Chief Minister candidates in this room, a couple sitting up on the stage up there. My question is around ministries and planning and environment. And do you feel like there's potentially a conflict between those two things? And perhaps they should be considered separately?
Do you have a particular candidate you'd like to ask that to?
The two sirs, as it were, the battle of the sirs. And Christina, yeah, and Christina as well.
Christina is also a Chief Minister candidate. Yeah. Okay, we're going to start with...
Any of you, if you've got a good answer for that.
Yeah. We're going to start with... Yeah. We'll start with Philip. We'll do that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, we're going to... Christina, did you hear the question? We'll start with Christina then.
Thank you. I think the question was about planning and environment, whether it was appropriate for the two to be together, because there is an inherent conflict sometimes. And I think you're right. I think this can be a relatively brief answer, that when there's a reorganisation under a new government, that the two should be split so that there can be a proper focus on the environment, and that conflict is taken away from the person who holds that brief.
Okay, Rob, yep.
There are more than a few Chief Minister candidates, I have to say. I'll speak on behalf of Reform. Our planning laws need to be based around the right drivers. What we have in the Bridge and Island Plan are some get-out clauses for developers, for example, that allow them to not produce green space, but sort of offset it. So those planning laws are vital. So the planning minister, yes, can apply laws that are developed. I think it should be perhaps separate from the environment minister, who comes up with the correct drivers for those sorts of laws, but they are passed in the Assembly. And whilst we have an Assembly that is willing to build on green fields, willing to allow that sort of offsetting to happen, then we will not make the step forward that perhaps you're looking for. So I would encourage that what we have is decent legislation to begin with that has correct drivers for this island and its needs, its green spaces, and a sustainable future for us all.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question from Slido. Now we've got that available in front of me. So this is a question from one of our viewers at home. And I'll open this up, so if anyone would really think they want to answer this question. A lot of environmental issues are to do with behaviour change, something we're very interested at Durrell. Changes at local level are down to the way we behave. How do you plan to raise awareness and engagement with Jersey people on how they can reduce emissions? But I would also say awareness is step one, actual behaviour change policies is step two. Would anyone like to answer that? Okay, Jonathan.
Okay, so we're at the eco-incentives, which I touched on earlier, and hopefully this will go a lot better. So I believe that Jersey can be world-leading in our approach to how we achieve carbon neutrality and how we as an island look towards a sustainable future. I believe that needs to be incentive-based, and I believe that that will come in the form of an app. How do we gamify that experience? How do we make buying that coffee give you some sustainable points? How do we start a bit of a competition amongst your peer groups or your circle, for example? I think, you know, awareness is going to be crucial, but we're going to need the thinking and the planning to actually start having solutions ready. And I do think a rewardable, sustainable reward system that could be perhaps linked up with tax benefits, I think could be really good. Help out those sustainable businesses. Help people to have that dashboard to make sustainable choices. And ultimately, help us all to live more sustainable lives.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan? Yep.
This is one for the Jonathans, obviously. I think the thing I've missed most in terms of the way that climate change has been approached over the last few years is passion and excitement. I mean, I came back to Jersey after a career in the UK in 2019, and I was very proud to come back to an island that had set ambitious climate change targets. And it seems to me that we've slightly slid backwards since then. And I think the thing that we can do as an island is remember that this isn't a zero-sum game. It isn't just about tax that is going to cost us money, and we've got to offset that against, you know, the possible benefits. There are other benefits involved in climate neutrality. There's health benefits, there's air pollution benefits, there's transport congestion benefits. And I think we don't talk enough about the positive things that we can do, the way that the tourism sector will be boosted by going carbon neutral, the way that we can drive that story of the island becoming carbon neutral through all our economic sectors and make it something that that people in Jersey feel proud of.
Thank you. Sir Mark? Down Sir Mark and then...
Just very briefly, this hasn't come up on the doorstep when I've been around the last few days, and that's an indication of the sort of issue we've got to address. People have got many other pressures in their lives. I think it's a combination of three things. You know, clearly, education helps. Ease of doing things helps. If it's easier to recycle, people are more likely to recycle. If it's difficult to recycle, then they're less likely to. Do we really want people driving 4x4s halfway around the island to do their recycling? And dare I say at the end, for politicians, it's about taking tough choices. What works is financial incentives and penalties. Driving a car in Jersey and parking a car is incredibly cheap. Indeed, when I said to somebody, why did you not get the bus somewhere, they said it's cheaper actually to drive in and park. A question, how many came here by public transport tonight? Why was public transport not organised for this event tonight? Because it would have been in many places in the UK. Absolutely. Now, hang on. I'm saying that in the UK, many places would have arranged a bus service from town to this event. I know. I'm just saying we need better, of course we need better bus services, but for events to actually arrange public transport would be an example. So it really is difficult to persuade people to change their behaviour. We need to look at what works and implement what works. And it is going to be tough and it's going to take time, but we absolutely have to do it because we have got to make these big reductions in emissions.
Thank you, Sir Mark. Okay, I'm going to have to call a halt there. I'm sorry, but we've got like about 2 minutes left. I should also say, yes, we could have arranged additional transport, but we are paying for this entire event this evening as part of our democratic process and the way we contribute. Okay, so thank you to all the candidates for coming along this evening. We do appreciate it. We know you're incredibly busy in this election season, but obviously for us, the environment underpins absolutely everything about how we live our lives and how we can be sustainable on this planet. I'd like to thank the audience for coming here this evening and taking part, our online audience. I hope that everyone's got something out of this. As I've said at various points throughout this evening, all the questions are going to be made public. And what we would hope is that the constituents pick up these questions and continue these conversations and continue asking these questions. And most of all, for me, I remember the first time I got to vote at 18. I am from Glasgow, long tradition of political history in that city. I couldn't wait to vote. and I have always voted. So if anything else, whatever politics you adhere to, whatever view you have, let's all get out and vote and make this an incredibly democratic, purposeful election for the benefit of us all. Thank you.